Spring 1943, a peculiar intelligence memorandum reaches the War Office in Whitehall. The subject is not artillery, not aircraft, not destroyers. The memorandum is a special operations executive briefing claiming that British operatives have introduced a specialized powder into German U-boat crew uniforms through clandestine channels across occupied Europe. A claim documented in wartime SOE records, though corresponding German archival material confirming the full operational scope remains limited. What the briefing describes is German submariners tearing at their own flesh in the claustrophobic, overheated interiors of their submarines. SOE field intelligence reported instances of patrols cut short, crews convinced they had contracted some virulent tropical disease. The Kriegsmarine was experiencing what SOE characterized as an outbreak of uncontrollable dermatitis spreading through submarine crews. According to British intelligence assessments, German command had no suspicion Britain was behind it. They suspected parasites, they suspected fungal infections, they suspected contaminated rations. The actual culprit was a tropical legume, weaponized by British chemists and infiltrated through resistance networks operating in the shadows of the Third Reich. This is the story of SOE itching powder. The weapon that transformed German U-boats into submerged torture chambers without detonating a single explosive. By 1942, German U-boats were throttling Britain's lifeline. Admiral Karl Dönnitz's Wolfpack tactics hunted Allied shipping lanes with brutal precision, sending cargo vessels to the ocean floor faster than British industry could build replacements. The Battle of the Atlantic threatened to choke the island fortress into starvation and collapse. Traditional naval warfare provided limited answers. Depth charges proved effective, but locating submarines across the immense Atlantic represented the critical obstacle. Aircraft coverage helped, but operational gaps allowed U-boats to strike with deadly consistency. Britain required unorthodox solutions to a crisis that threatened national survival. Churchill grasped this reality more clearly than his contemporaries. Following the fall of France in 1940, he established the Special Operations Executive with an unambiguous mandate to set Europe ablaze. SOE would wage conflict through sabotage, subversion, and methods that military traditionalists would consider beyond acceptable warfare. The organization recruited researchers, technical specialists, and unconventional thinkers capable of designing weapons that orthodox strategists would dismiss as fantasy. Among their creations was something that appeared preposterous until one examined the underlying science. Itching powder, not the novelty shop product children purchased for schoolyard mischief. SOE's formulation was a weaponized dermal irritant so severe that exposure reportedly necessitated medical intervention. According to declassified documentation housed in the Imperial War Museum's SOE collection, the powder appeared in supply catalogs alongside invisible inks and incendiary timing devices as standard equipment for resistant cells. The active compound derived from Mucuna pruriens, a tropical climbing plant known colloquially as cowhage or velvet bean. Its Sanskrit designation kapikaku translates directly as one begins itching like a monkey. The plant's seed pods are covered in microscopic barbed filaments called trichomes. According to dermatological research examining the velvet bean's properties, each hair measures approximately 2 to 3 millimeters in length with terminal points just 1 to 3 microns in diameter, finer than human hair by a magnitude of 20. These needle-like projections contain an enzyme designated mucinane, a cysteine protease that generates intense pruritus through both mechanical penetration and chemical activation. Scientific studies have documented that even minimal contact with these trichomes produces rapid onset itching in most subjects, with maximum intensity developing within minutes. The trichomes possess such negligible mass that hundreds weigh barely a milligram. A modest container could accommodate millions of these microscopic instruments of torment. The mechanism assaulted victims through dual pathways. Mechanically, the barbed structures pierced the outer skin layer and lodged into the epidermis, activating sensory nerve terminals evolved to detect foreign intrusions. Chemically, the mucinane enzyme released upon embedding triggered a histamine-independent pruritic response. This meant conventional antihistamine medications offered no therapeutic effect. Scratching merely forced particles deeper into dermal layers and transferred contamination to additional body regions, potentially including ocular tissues. The itching could endure for hours or days depending on contamination intensity. In simple terms, once it touched your skin, nothing could stop it. SOE developed and manufactured the powder at classified research establishments concealed throughout rural England. Station IX at the Frythe, a former luxury hotel near Welland Garden City, functioned as the primary development facility. Station XII at a Ston House near Stevenage handled manufacturing, packaging, and distribution operations, commanded by Colonel Leslie J. C. Wood, widely considered by historians a principal inspiration for the character Q in the James Bond literary series. The facility employed over 1,000 personnel by 1942, producing everything from the legendary Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife to explosive-filled taxidermy rats. Itching powder integrated seamlessly into their inventory of specialized devices designed for resistance organizations operating in enemy-controlled territory. The powder was packaged with characteristic SOE cunning. Camouflaged as ordinary foot powder tins or talcum containers, it could survive scrutiny and be transported into occupied Europe without arousing suspicion. Primary infiltration routes operated through neutral Switzerland and Sweden, with the powder delivered to resistance operatives positioned in laundries, textile factories, and other employment that provided access to German military clothing. Official SOE application instructions were unambiguous. The greatest effect is produced by applying the powder to the inside of underclothing, with particular emphasis on garments contacting the more tender parts of the human anatomy. If you are finding this exploration of British covert warfare intriguing, consider subscribing. It takes a moment, supports the channel's growth, and ensures you won't miss the next investigation into unconventional British weaponry. Now let us examine what transpired when this powder reached German forces. Greek resistance operatives conducted some of the earliest successful field applications, treating bed linens used by German soldiers billeted in requisitioned homes and military quarters. The results validated the weapon's fundamental strategic advantage. According to SOE operational reports, the Germans suspected nothing, attributing their affliction to parasitic infestation. Plausible attribution was engineered into the weapon's symptomology. Effects could be ascribed to lice, dermatological disease, or inadequate sanitation rather than intentional sabotage. In France, SOE operative Ben Cowburn, among the most accomplished agents in occupied Europe who completed 4 separate missions, orchestrated itching powder infiltration into a commercial laundry servicing German soldiers and Gestapo personnel in Troyes. The contamination propagated through their uniform supply chain without a single detention or even a suggestion of suspicion directed toward the resistance network. Norwegian operations reportedly devised an innovative delivery mechanism by lining prophylactics with itching powder and distributing them to brothels patronized by German servicemen. The reports describe multiple instances of German soldiers requiring medical treatment. SOE's Stockholm station reportedly identified another distribution vector by collecting German envelopes from Swedish citizens with family in occupied territories, filling them with powder, and posting them back into the Reich. Every letter from home became a potential contamination device, but the science was only half the weapon. The strategic logic behind specifically targeting U-boat crews lay in understanding precisely how submarine conditions would amplify the powder's effects. German submariners already endured among the most brutal living conditions in any military branch. Bathing was forbidden aboard U-boats because freshwater was strictly conserved for consumption. Men carried a single change of clothing and typically wore identical uniforms throughout deployments lasting anywhere from 3 weeks to 6 months. The environment inside a submarine was savage. Engine compartment temperatures exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit during warmer seasons, generating constant perspiration in confined, moisture-saturated conditions. According to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, which maintains the captured U-505, 59 men compressed into a pressure hull no larger than a subway car, sharing merely 35 bunks and sleeping in rotation. Some crew members slept adjacent to torpedoes in the weapon storage areas. Diesel exhaust permeated everything, including food. This is where the plan became truly cruel. Under these circumstances, itching powder embedded in undergarments would constitute a form of sustained torture. Men could not change uniforms. They could not launder contaminated clothing. They could not properly cleanse themselves to remove embedded particles. The microscopic barbs would work progressively deeper into skin that was continuously sweating, chafing against fabric, and unable to recover. Medical intervention was virtually impossible at sea because U-boat medical supplies were configured for combat injuries and acute illness, not mysterious dermatological epidemics affecting entire crews simultaneously. The psychological consequences would amplify the physical agony. Crews already confined in claustrophobic spaces, stressed by the perpetual threat of depth-charge bombardment and convoy escorts, would find concentration on operational duties compromised. Men who should have been vigilant for enemy contact would instead be distracted by uncontrollable itching. Morale, already precarious in the U-boat service by 1943 as Allied countermeasures intensified, would deteriorate further under assault from invisible adversaries they could not identify or combat. The real damage came at sea. The October 1943 SOE report to Churchill claimed contamination of approximately 25,000 U-boat crew uniforms. SOE characterized the German Navy as the most severely affected by the operation. Allied intelligence documented at least one case of a submarine returning to port prematurely because the crew believed they had contracted a serious dermatological condition. British Admiralty officials monitored effects through multiple intelligence streams, noting what they interpreted as declining morale among U-boat crews alongside observations of deteriorating standards aboard captured submarines. German military medical services recorded dermatitis cases, but available evidence suggests no systematic investigation connected the outbreaks to deliberate enemy action. The Gestapo ruthlessly infiltrated resistance networks throughout occupied Europe, capturing numerous SOE agents and destroying entire operational cells. Yet the itching powder campaign's decentralized nature, involving countless anonymous laundry workers rather than identifiable operatives, appears to have rendered it resistant to counterintelligence penetration. The contrast with American initiatives illustrates why SOE's methodology represented a more successful model. The United States Office of Strategic Services developed their own harassment weapon called Who Me, a spray bottle designed to produce a fecal odor that French resistance fighters could employ to publicly humiliate German officers. The program was terminated after only 2 weeks. The volatile compounds proved impossible to control. Operatives would typically end up equally contaminated as their targets. The weapon backfired, literally and figuratively. By contrast, the British powder required no dispersal apparatus and left the saboteur uncontaminated. SOE itching powder was merely one weapon in a comprehensive harassment strategy designed to make German occupation unbearable at every level. Cacolube, an abrasive grease sometimes containing carborundum powder, destroyed vehicle engines when introduced into lubrication systems. Before D-Day, the SOE's Pimento network reportedly employed young resistance members to drain axle oil from the 2nd SS Panzer Division's rail transport cars and replace it with abrasive compounds, contributing to delays of German armored forces during the Normandy campaign. The cumulative effect of these harassment operations was intended to be strategic. As SOE Commander Brigadier Colin Gubbins wrote in his foundational manual, The Art of Guerrilla Warfare, "The object of guerrilla warfare is to harass the enemy in every way possible within all the territory he holds to such an extent that he is eventually incapable either of embarking on a war or of continuing one." General Eisenhower acknowledged after the war that SOE operations played a very considerable part in Allied victory. SOE was officially disbanded in January 1946, its archives transferred to CIS control. The organization's genuine legacy resides in the doctrines and capabilities it pioneered. The United States Office of Strategic Services partnered extensively with SOE throughout the conflict, and OSS personnel who became CIA officers imported British tradecraft into American intelligence. Operation Jedburgh, joint SOE and OSS three-man teams parachuted into France around D-Day, directly inspired modern unconventional warfare units. United States Army Special Forces trace their organizational lineage to Jedburgh operations. Station XII's iconic Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife appears on the insignia of the SAS, United States Army Special Forces, and United States Army Special Operations Command, a direct visual connection to SOE's heritage. Ian Fleming, a naval intelligence officer who coordinated with SOE, based elements of James Bond partially on SOE figures, including Commando Gus March Phillips. The gadgets that captivate Bond audiences in every film originated in the very real innovations of stations IX and XII. The itching powder campaign demonstrates that warfare's decisive factors are occasionally psychological rather than kinetic. A microscopic plant fiber, properly deployed, could potentially compel a submarine to terminate its patrol, an outcome that bombs and depth charges frequently failed to achieve. German submariners struggling with unexplained skin conditions in the sweltering confines of their boats, unable to focus on their duties, represented a British approach to warfare that valued ingenuity over overwhelming force. Churchill's Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare understood what conventional military thinking often overlooked. When prosecuting a total war against an adversary threatening national extinction, unconventional tactics could degrade enemy capability in ways traditional weapons could not. The Germans constructed a formidable submarine force. British scientists discovered a method to make their uniforms a source of torment. How extensively this altered operational outcomes remains difficult to measure from available records. But as a demonstration of creative warfare, the itching powder stands as one of SOE's most distinctive achievements. The powder appeared gentle, the effects were not, that was the point. That was British engineering applied not to killing, but to making existence unbearable for an enemy trapped beneath the Atlantic with nowhere to find relief. The Germans built steel monsters to dominate the sea. The British turned their uniforms into enemies. One required factories and shipyards, the other required a bean plant and imagination. That difference defined the war Churchill chose to fight. Churchill chose to fight.